My grandmother used to make this soup, and she called it Grandma's soup. And it was literally, she would take like 14 packages of ramen noodles.
Yeah.
And put them in a big pot with water. And then she would take like 5 cans of those, like peas and carrots.
Disgusting.
Yeah.
And so she made ramen noodles.
And then she'd put all the seasoning in there. She just made ramen noodles with vegetables. Called it Grandma's soup. You know
what? Probably my most embarrassing favorite food in the world is ramen with tortilla chips. Because I am a human melting pot.
Nerdy, unqualified, and probably indistinguishable from rambling. Welcome to the A&D Show.
To the A&D Show. I'm David.
I'm Austin.
And today we have a very nerdy episode for you.
It's dark.
It's dark.
It's dark.
It's nighty.
Dark. We are talking
but it's not about 90s.
My favorite movie of all time, The Dark Knight, by Sir Christopher Nolan.
I don't think he's knighted.
He is in my heart.
Oh, okay. Okay, well.
The Dark Knight is far and away the best superhero movie of all time, and if you say it's Infinity War, you're wrong.
Let's just pause right there for a second.
No,
just take a quick deviation from our regularly scheduled program to bring you this announcement. Infinity War wasn't that great. I mean,
it was good.
It was good.
It's good. It's not $1 billion in the box office good.
Let me just drop this bomb in there for you guys, for you listeners and the world at large. First of all, before we go any further, on both our regular content and on this statement I'm about to make, spoilers. So if you don't want to hear this, skip ahead.
No spoilers.
Skip ahead by about, it's going to be spoilery.
Spoilers.
It's not going to be spoilers.
No spoilers.
No, listen. It's good. It's good, I promise. So I have a theory. Everybody's talking about, okay, even if you haven't watched the movie, this isn't even that much of a spoiler, okay? A bunch of people die. A bunch of characters die, right? And even if you haven't seen it, you should probably know that.
I think the world knows that.
The whole thing is all about, oh no, everyone's going to die. That's going to be the point from the beginning, right? But I have a theory. And with as few spoilers as possible, I'll say this. The only Avengers movie that's actually going to be a legitimate tearjerker is number 4. And I'll tell you why. Because the characters that we're endeared to the most won't meet their fate until that movie comes.
I agree.
We're going to have to do a whole episode on this.
We will. We'll have to.
And we'll wait. For you listeners, we'll wait
a few more months.
Maybe until it's come out on DVD or something, so you guys can have a good chance to see it.
Thank the Lord for advanced screenings.
Yeah, advanced private screenings.
Advanced screenings in my home.
We'll wait until you guys have had a chance to see it.
We'll talk.
And then we'll discuss, because there's a lot to talk about. I've been doing some research. There's a lot of theories we can go into, but we won't yet. We'll
wait for it.
We'll save it to another episode. But
back to my main topic.
Back to the main content.
The Dark Knight is the best superhero movie ever made. It changed the landscape of superhero movies.
I feel like, just as a side note on that, I think you're wrong. I mean, I think you're right. Sorry,
there you go.
I guess I'm asleep today. I don't know. I think you're correct. But one thing that's interesting is I think that it set the bar so high that its predecessors in that same DC universe couldn't keep up.
Right.
I mean, look at what happened with Man of Steel. Man of Steel was not a horrible movie. It wasn't good. It could have been much better, right. But it could have been much worse. I mean, we're not so far away from Batman and Robin that we forgot how bad it could be, right? So, but it could have been much worse. But I feel like because of how successful The Dark Knight was, and the entire trilogy, the Dark Knight trilogy, because of how dark and gritty Christopher Nolan made it and how kind of more true to life and kind of realistic. I feel like that was, it did a bit of a disservice to DC films because DC automatically felt like, oh, this is the direction we want to go. We want to make everything super gritty and not comic booky. Whereas, Marvel over on the MCU, they're busting out all these movies that are big and bright and flashy and just, and then everything DC's coming out with, it's like you want to kill yourself whenever you finish watching it.
Right.
Anyway, you're right though. I mean, it was a game changer in all aspects of the thing.
If you look at these movies, okay, so before The Dark Knight came out, the main you had Spider-Man, you had some superhero movies that were a little bit darker. You had Constantine. I thought Constantine was a good movie with Keanu Reeves. I liked Constantine.
It was weird.
It was weird.
Interesting.
There was V for Vendetta that was based on a graphic novel, which I liked. V for Vendetta. V for Vendetta was a fun movie.
Also very weird, very, very slow. I actually only recently watched that, maybe within the last year and a half.
Yeah.
I tried to watch it. What did it come out in 2005?
Yes.
I think.
Yeah, I think so.
I tried to watch it. I don't know, a couple years after it came out, whenever all the hype had died down about it, and everybody was like, "V for Vendetta, it's amazing." And I tried to watch it, and I literally fell asleep in like the first 5 minutes, and then I could not make myself go back and try it again until just about a year ago.
Right, and you had some attempts at darker films. Okay, you had X-Men: The Last Stand. Had an attempt to be darker,
even though
they were more gritty.
They were trying to mod a historically non-dark series into a darker story.
Right. You had The Punisher, who had moments of darkness, but it overall failed as a movie, and it had too many slapstick moments. Daredevil.
Are you talking about which Punisher are you talking about?
The one with Thomas Jane.
Thomas Jane. I actually liked that one.
No. It wasn't a bad movie.
It wasn't Ghost Rider, so that's a plus.
It wasn't Ghost Rider. You had the Fantastic Four. There just weren't.
Yeah.
At the time, really, for the most part, you had the X-Men franchise was big, and you had the Spider-Man franchise. Blade was in there. You had some attempts at some one-off movies, but you didn't have anything necessarily that was just this brilliant. Look at how good these movies are, or these franchises. And Christopher Nolan takes over the Batman franchise, and I remember somehow, and I can't explain this. Somehow, at the time in 2005, I was in college, and I wasn't really paying attention to movies like that. And then I hadn't realized that Batman Begins came out. And so when I saw Batman Begins, it relit this love of the Batman movies because I remember watching Batman and Robin, and Batman Forever. Was Batman and Robin the one with the bat nips? Was that the one was the Clooney suit? I
think they started that in Batman Forever.
Oh, it's terrible.
Val Kilmer.
Terrible. But
it wasn't quite as pronounced.
No,
it was.
I remember, so I had this bad taste in my mouth about the Batman movies, and then Batman Begins comes out, and it was perfect. And I remember sitting there thinking, I cannot wait for The Dark Knight. Like The Dark Knight, the first preview that I saw for The Dark Knight, I could not contain my excitement. I remember I was there for the midnight show. I was there for opening night. I was ecstatic, and I couldn't wait to see it. And I remember watching it, and the critical response was spot on for this movie. I think Rotten Tomatoes has it at like a 96%. I think.
Yeah.
It is at a 94% for the Rotten Tomatoes score and also the audience score. There are people that adamantly hate the film, and I think people that adamantly hate the film try to be edgy. There is
just trying to be contrary.
Yeah, there is a political, a conservative pundit that writes for the Daily Wire named Matt Walsh, who openly trashes all superhero movies, and he hates this movie. There's not really a good reason why he hates it. It's a phenomenally well filmed. It's phenomenally well done from start to finish.
Yeah.
The way that the way the story opens to the way it closes and crescendos, it's done so immensely well. But I've always been bothered by one question. Did Heath Ledger's death inflate his role as the Joker?
Yeah.
Did the death of Heath Ledger, I think 2 weeks before release, did that inflate part of his role? Now, I don't think so. I remember the Nicholson Joker. In '89, it was great. Mm-hmm. Was it '89 that came out?
Yeah, that was '89.
At the time, that was great. Because really the first Batman was a pretty dark film for the time.
In all respects, it is still. It's a fairly dark film.
Because
Tim Burton.
Right. Yeah, because Tim Burton. When you're making a film like this, you want to get as broad, as broad of an audience as you can.
Yeah.
Kids run around wearing Batman shirts all the time. I remember thinking to myself, like, this was probably one of the first superhero movies that I would have been like, I don't know that I want my kid to watch this at 4, 5, 6 years old, because there were some scenes in there where you've got the fake Batman hanging off the side of the building. You've got the pencil trick.
Yeah.
Stuff
all
like that.
His story, his expositions about his scars, whether they were real or fake, is still
right. And
it's
so
graphic.
It's one of those things where it's like that was one of the first superhero movies, other than like probably Spawn, I guess, that I would be like, I don't really want my kid watching this.
Yeah.
But the way that the movie played out, I think Heath Ledger's role in the movie was really it played what it played to the level that it was supposed to.
Yeah.
I think that I remember reading after his death about how he prepared for the role and the things that he had read, and I mean he immersed himself in this role,
right?
And it showed.
Interestingly enough, in response to that question, did his death inflate the role? I'm inclined to think no, and I'll tell you why. Because in truth, I remember it was 2005 when the film was released.
Yeah,
or was that the first one?
05 was 08 was Dark Knight. Yeah, okay. 05 was Batman Begins. 2008 was for The Dark Knight.
Okay, so 08, I remember when the film came out. I remember seeing it, and I remember thinking that it was great. And I remember, though, at the same time, being on the cultural bandwagon of hating on Heath Ledger and on Christopher Nolan, even, for the idea of putting Heath Ledger in that role because of how iconic...
People were mad.
Yeah.
People were furious.
Because of how iconic Jack's Joker was.
Yep.
But... Jack, like, we're friends. We're on a first name basis.
We are.
But I remember watching it, and I remember thinking to myself, wow, this is iconic. Like, this is an instant cult classic. And then I remember hearing that he died, like, really either right before or right after I saw it.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking to myself, that's really sad. He was, like, on his way to stardom. Like, he was on his way up. But it didn't occur to me at all that his death had any relation to that role, right?
Right.
It wasn't until reports come through, like YouTube
later,
or through the news or whatever, that, and of course, even still, you can't really quantify those kinds of statements that say, well, he dove so deep into this role that it killed him.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting way of looking at it, and for all intents and purposes, it might be true, but we have no way of knowing that, right? And so, looking at it like that, it wasn't until after I'd seen the movie, already appreciated how good the role was, that I learned that he had passed away. And it wasn't until several weeks after I learned that he passed away that these reports started coming in, or that I started hearing about him at the very least, of part of the reason why he may have died is because of how dark and depressed he got because of his research and his diving into that role. And, in the years since, I've watched a few behind-the-scenes type expositions about the things that he would do that were strategic on his part to envelop himself in that role.
Right.
One of those things being he would not allow, and this may be completely made up, I don't know. Any of our listeners, if this is made up, feel free to comment below and let us know. But one of the things that I'd heard was that he would not allow... He would do the prosthetics in the makeup chair, but the actual makeup itself he would apply.
He did himself.
Just because he wanted it to be psychotic and inconsistent.
Right.
And he wanted it to look like it was just done on a whim. And so, and things like that he would do just to really envelop himself in the character.
Right.
And, I could see that being derived, or see his death being derived from that kind of intensity. But to answer the question from my perspective, I don't think that his death inflated the role. I think that the role inflated the causes of his death.
Right. I'll agree with that. So do you think he was better than Nicholson?
Better than Jack? That's a really tough question to answer.
See, I think they both had their pros and their cons.
Yeah. Well, they were crazy. Here's the thing. They were psychotic at different levels. Like, they were equally psychotic as the Joker, because you can't be the Joker and not be a madman. But they were psychotic at different levels, but they were psychotic in different styles based on cultural psychosis, I guess you could say, at the time. Because look at, Jack Nicholson, he did the iconic 89 Joker. And that sounds like a really bad car. Look at this 1989 Joker. No, he was the iconic 89 Joker from Tim Burton's first film of the Batman series, which is easily, in my mind, even
it's probably number 2 for me.
For me, it's number 1 because it's for one, it came out the year I was born, so.
It's one of the few movies from the 80s that holds up.
Yeah, well, and it doesn't hold up well, but it's still great.
No, honestly, I mean, if you change the attire and the landscaping, the story stays together the entire time.
Oh, no, yeah, the story's fantastic. The visuals are not always the greatest. But, is Heath Ledger comparable or even better as Joker? I would say that you can't really compare the two.
They're two
because
different Jokers.
The time period, the era of Jack Nicholson's Joker, what he did was the most psychotic and scariest thing he could be in that time period.
Yeah.
Whereas Heath Ledger's Joker was a new psychotic, a new crazy for a new generation.
I think to me what sold Ledger's Joker, honestly, and this is going to sound really dumb, but what sold it to me was the fact that he was just kind of like an everyman. Okay, so think about the fight with Batman in the abandoned building. Mm-hmm. He had those 2 dogs with him, and he had the dogs attack Batman because he was just a regular. He wasn't strong. He was just a quote unquote mortal. He wasn't like a
which Batman are you talking about?
Dark Knight.
Okay,
he wasn't like Bane where he was. This huge stature, and
sure.
He wasn't the Scarecrow where he had this chemical. He was just a regular man with a knife.
Right.
So I think that's what played, I think, Ledger's Joker so well, is that it felt like this is the kind of thing that you could expect. This is the kind of Joker that, you could really look at and say, okay, this is believable.
Yeah.
And that's why I always liked the way that Ledger, the way that Ledger did his role as Joker, because I think that from I said earlier, from start to finish, from the opening scene of robbing the bank with the buses to where he basically kills almost his entire, or basically gets his entire team to kill each other.
Yeah.
To the hospital scene with Harvey Dent, aka Two-Face, to the break-in at Wayne Tower, to where he comes into that party and crashes the party. I mean, there are so many memorable scenes from that movie, and if you look at it and you take each one individually, the way that Ledger played those roles, played that role, it seems like almost every single scene he was, there's a different Joker, and he played it so well.
I heard it said once in a film by an antagonist that the reason why, and in fact it might have been that film, now that I think about it, but that the reason why the hero, I'm struggling to remember how it goes, something like the reason why the hero won't win in the end is because the hero has principles and values that he will refuse to.
And that was from The Dark Knight.
Was that?
He was talking about that he would always win because he had a certain moral compass he had to
and
to
even
align.
if he broke his own moral compass to do what he had to do, the enemy still won.
Actually, no, you know what, that might have been. Was that Batman Begins where Ra's al Ghul had? See now I'm thinking it was Batman Begins. Possibly.
Well, it was
one or the other.
Because you have the antagonist, and the antagonist is saying, you can either let all these people die or you can kill me and stop them. Right. But either way, you lose. Right. Because you have to let them die and not do what you've sworn to do, or you have to kill me and do what you've sworn not to do. And it's like, and that was the thing that made Heath's Joker so pervasive, was just the fact that his character and everything that he does throughout the film so completely illustrates his absolute lack of values, his absolute lack of anything human. Right. And though he was a human. Right. You know, he was a mortal, average, everyday kind of person, but he was so utterly devoid of anything that makes him human. Right. And that was what made it so scary.
I think for me, when I look at The Dark Knight, I think what made that movie to me so good was not just the storytelling, not just the way that Christopher Nolan shot it, not the way that you had the dark the dark tones to it. I mean, it was a very dark movie. It was one of the first movies that was shot really that dark. Yeah. But to me, what made the movie so good from start to finish was the way that Nolan had Christian Bale and Heath Ledger's characters interacting the entire film. Because it's one of the few movies where you could sit there and say, okay, you know what? Maybe Batman does lose in the end for this film, because it was so believable and it was done so well. It was written so well that you really told yourself, maybe this is how the story ends.
Right. Well, and whenever you see the way, spoilers, if you haven't seen it already, it's literally been 10 years. Go watch it, for Pete's sake. But when the way that the film ends, the way that, Jim Gordon speaks to Bruce or to Batman, whoever, and he says, we need you. You need to be the hero we need, not the hero we want. Right. And so he ends up taking the fall for Harvey. Right. Because Harvey was his legacy, even though he had flipped and pulled a Solomon and flipped in his last few minutes of life and did a bunch of bad stuff, his legacy as a crime fighter
was more important
than Batman's legacy. And I really liked that element of the hero being more than just saving the day. Right. The hero being the one willing to take the hit in order to make life better. I really liked that. And that was, not to get all super religious or anything on a podcast about movies and nerd stuff, but that's a biblical concept. Right. And that was a really cool thing to see them, flesh out on screen.
Right. And it was done the right way. And you look at The Dark Knight Rises, and it was a dumpster fire. It wasn't a good movie, and I was totally let down by that. But part of that's because originally in The Dark Knight Rises, it wasn't going to be Bane, and it wasn't going to be Talia al Ghul as the antagonist. Mm-hmm. It was going to be Heath Ledger again. He had Ledger was supposed to have this huge arcing storyline in The Dark Knight Rises, and he didn't, because he couldn't. There were rumors. There was rumors that they were going to recast it for that film, and they ended up doing it. And I think that with The Dark Knight being as good as it was, that hurt The Dark Knight Rises, because no matter how good that movie was, it wasn't The Dark Knight. Right. But the big question is did The Dark Knight change the landscape in general for superhero films? Now, you look at the next movie to come out after The Dark Knight, I want to say was Watchmen. A very, very dark,
gritty.
And it wasn't good.
The storyline was very convoluted and confusing.
Awful.
I appreciated the visual aesthetic.
Yeah,
it was a great looking movie. But it get past some different things that probably shouldn't have been in there.
There were parts of it. It's hard to watch that movie.
Yeah,
but you look at the movies that were done after that, and I would say, 70% of them have had a darker feel to them than the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies.
I think didn't the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies they come out at? It was like, when did the first two come out? Because I feel like if any of them were impacted by the success of The Dark Knight, it would have been the third one whenever they included that weird emo dance scene.
Yes, Spider-Man 3 came out in 2007, which was the year before The Dark Knight came out.
Okay, so it wasn't directly influenced. Right. Okay, so here's my answer to that question. Did the comic book movie landscape change because of The Dark Knight? I would say yes. Pretty extensively.
I think that after The Dark Knight, the movies were made to be more realistic. I think.
Making humanizing the heroes a little bit more. One of the things that a lot of people talk about the visual of it. Right. You look at pretty much every DC movie that's come out post Dark Knight, Batman Begins, Dark Knight Rises, post that trilogy from
shot with a black filter over the lens.
Yeah, it's like somebody dipped them in black goo, and they're all just. It's like you're looking through the sunglasses the whole time.
We've discussed this.
Yeah,
I've always been a bigger DC fan than Marvel. Okay,
same.
It's not
a surprise.
But you're exactly right. You've got these. I don't necessarily want them to be as campy at times as the Marvel films. Mm-hmm. Now, I say campy. Thor is hysterical.
Yeah, Ragnarok.
Okay? Ragnarok.
We've talked about that before.
Yeah. Ragnarok was amazing. It was a funny movie. Thor. Thor's part in Infinity War was funny. But you've got these DC films that are all dark. The Dark Knight Rises, Man of Steel, Dawn of Justice, Suicide Squad, Justice League.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that they're doing, and you can see this kind of transition. Actually, you can see it pretty dramatically transition from Dawn of Justice into Wonder Woman, right? And even into Suicide Squad, because I think Wonder Woman and Suicide Squad came out right around the same time. But you can actually see the visual aesthetic change. Now, they keep the same kind of grittiness, but they're changing the actual color palette, because you look at, who was it? Zack Snyder, right? Yeah. That did Man of Steel. Everything was real dark, muted tones, right? Nothing was bright and vibrant. And then you look at Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, and it was even worse.
Right.
Like you look at for example, here's a good example, and I have something else I want to say about Dark Knight Rises, or The Dark Knight, after I say this, but let me just drop this nugget. Go back, if you do dare, go back and watch the Ultimate Edition of Dawn of Justice, because it was worlds better than the theatrical, but that's another side note. But go back and look at what Wonder Woman's costume looked like in Dawn of Justice. That Joker was copper.
Yeah.
It was brown and copper. Didn't have any color in it at all. And then, literally like a year later, here comes Wonder Woman, and her costume in that movie, her standalone film,
red and blue,
was bright gold, bright red, bright blue. The island was like these gorgeous, super saturated colors. It looked like a Michael Bay film. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, what? And it
looked better.
It looked much better. It felt good to watch something. It felt like you weren't watching something that was coated in dirt.
Right.
But no, going back to, I wanted to say this, because this is contrary to what a lot of people think and say about the impact The Dark Knight had on the comic book movie landscape, right? If you look at all three, Batman Begins, Dark Knight, and Dark Knight Rises, all three of them, as independent films, but also as the conglomerate, one of the things that Christopher Nolan is known for, and you can see it in pretty much every film he's ever made, is his narrative structure. I watched I watched a video on YouTube. If I knew the channel, I'd shout it out, but I don't off the top of my head. I watched a video where they did an exposition on why his movies are so good, because most of his movies, if not all of them, are just well laid out, just great storytelling. And it's because he focuses on the story over the visuals. Now, he always has great visuals, but he also focuses more heavily on the story. Right. And if you look at his narrative structure, it's very classical. He writes things like a play. And one of the things that this video talked about was that his narrative structure is Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, Act 4. Right? Throughout the entire film. And the only way that you know when you're transitioning from one act to another is that there is something that happens that the characters cannot revert from. Right? So I'm trying to remember in The Dark Knight, Batman Begins. No, let's just go with The Dark Knight, right? One of the act changes, I think it was from Act 3 to Act 4, was when it was 2 to 3, I can't remember, but when the explosion goes off and it kills Rachel. Right. And it like messes up Harvey, makes him into Two-Face. That in and of itself, that act of vengeance or act of violence or whatever, there's no going back from that because Rachel's character is dead. Right. And Harvey's character is mangled all up, and there's no way to go back from that, right? And so those things are what determine in his films those are the things that determine when you're switching from one act to another. And so, it's very complicated, and yet at the same time it makes so much sense. And so one of the things that I think this is what it's all boiling down to is that I think that The Dark Knight and the Batman Begins trilogy as a whole dramatically impacted comic book movie landscape simply in that the storytelling of comic book movies up to that point had not delved into that classical storytelling genre, like writing their stories out like a multi-act tragedy like what Shakespeare would have written. Because when you look at the Batman Begins trilogy, even as not as good as Dark Knight Rises was, all three of them play out like multi-act tragedy plays like would have been written by Shakespeare. Right. And if you were to take them and actually write them out as Broadway-style plays, they would work. And they would still have every bit the weight that they had as a film. And I think that definitely changed because you look at it was 2008. So The Dark Knight came out the same year that Iron Man came out. Yes. So the MCU, there's no way to quantify this, but it's easy to see how the MCU and their 20 film story arc and multiple things happening, their phase kind of storytelling that they're doing is basically, forms into acts, right? Phase 1, Phase 2, Phase 3. They just finished Phase 4. They're beginning next year, right? And it's easy to see how they took influence or inspiration from like Batman Begins, because Batman Begins was written with that kind of that classical narrative structure. It's easy to see how they took that and they're like, okay, how do we do something like that? Something with that level of attention to detail and that level of classical, just good thought and writing, without copying a competing property, right? So they're like, okay, well, instead of doing just one movie that has that same, let's do that within each movie, but let's also create an overarching storyline for 15, 20 years in advance, and we'll just keep knocking them out. And then whenever we get 3 or 4, 5, 6 movies at a time into one, that will wrap up. Right. We'll wrap that up with an Avengers movie. Mm-hmm. Wrap it up with another Avengers movie. And that's where you see Avengers 1, Avengers 2, and now Avengers Infinity War, the third one. Those are all moments that turn the tide of and reflect upon the next phase, right? So we're not talking about Avengers, but this is the storytelling part of it, right? Avengers 1, what happens? The whole army, whatever the faceless army guys come in through the portal in space. That experience influences everything that happens all the way through, and still is influencing storylines. Still, look at Spider-Man: Homecoming was a Phase 3, right?
I haven't seen it yet.
That's a good one.
I know, I've heard it's good.
Spider-Man: Homecoming was a Phase 3. I think it was a Phase 3 story. It might have been late Phase 2. I can't remember. But the entire premise of that story happens because of Avengers 1. Because of all the technology and all this junk that's left in New York makes the storyline possible for Spider-Man: Homecoming. And so it's easy to see how that narrative structure idea of overarching storylines and everything happening in acts or phases, like Marvel likes to call it, it's easy to see how that's influenced by the success of merging the classical with the comical.
Right.
When you see, like, Batman Begins and The Dark Knight. So, did it change? Absolutely. In my opinion, absolutely. And for the better, because you haven't seen... You look back at what comic book movies used to be, what Batman used to be. I mean... God rest his soul. Adam West was a... He did die, didn't he?
He did?
I think he's dead.
He did?
Pretty sure he is.
Someone check that for us and let us know.
Yeah, check it and comment below. But God rest his soul, Adam West was the classic Batman. But those were so campy, and there was no weight behind the story, and there was nothing really all that relatable. It was more like a cartoon, but played out by real people.
Yeah, it was bad. It was bad.
Even the 90s Batman, even the 90s Batman animated series had more weight than that.
Right.
But then you fast forward, and the stories that they're telling with these characters and all that, it's just more relatable, and overall, it's just more fun.
I agree.
More fun. Well, I think that's all the time we have for this episode. Do you have anything else you want to add?
I just love Batman. I love Batman.
I mean, one thing I think we can both agree on, which we haven't disagreed on much this episode, surprisingly. One thing I think we can both agree on is, if you haven't seen The Dark Knight,
please go see it.
Please watch it.
My dad has seen it, and he doesn't like movies. Yeah. He had to watch it 4 times because he kept falling asleep. Because if he gets in his chair, he falls asleep. But that's just how he does this. That's how he does his life. That's how he lives life.
You can always do like I do, and get it on your phone or something.
This is true.
Buy it on Amazon. I don't know, whatever, and then watch it in 15, 20-minute bursts over a period of a week, and then you can nice and slowly digest it.
This is true.
But it's worth the viewing. It's not one of those movies that you can, in my opinion, it's not one of those movies you can rewatch tons and tons of times because of how heavy it is.
Right.
But it is a really great storyline, really well put together movie. So if you're on the market for some good cinema,
The Dark Knight's good.
It's a great one. Start with Batman Begins though, so you can get the origin story,
get the whole thing.
But feel free to continue on to Part 2, Dark Knight, and if you dare, Part 3, and you'll probably sympathize with our viewpoint on Part 3.
It's been a good day.
It's been a long day.
It's been a long day.
Was it Tuesday?
Yes.
This will release on Friday?
Yes.
I think this is the first time we've ever recorded an episode that we didn't record it on the day we released it, or the day before we released it.
If you're listening, I love you for listening. Thank you.
You don't want to say anything to your wife who's also not listening?
She's not going to listen to this. I've done this twice now, and she's yet to hear one episode.
Just continue to give her options of getting nice, loving things from you for listening to it, but never tell her about it.
All right. So there's this vlog people that she likes called Phil and Alex. So if you listen to the episode, I will buy you one of their shirts that you've wanted for a while, but you refuse to buy one yourself. So if you listen to this, I will buy one for you. One of the Phil and Alex Love Multiply shirts. So I know she won't listen though. So
well, I guess that makes you off the hook.
That's true.
I mean, nothing better than offering something nice to somebody you care about, knowing that they will never hear you offer it to them.
My wife loves me, so I don't force her to listen to my rantings and.
She's texting you right now, and she's like, "Where you at, fool?"
She's tired. She's ready for bed.
Oh, man. Well, thank you guys so much for listening.
Thanks for listening. We love you all.
We are so happy to do this podcast and to know that there's at least one person out there who listens to it.
Thanks, Mom. Actually, thanks, David's mom.
Yeah, thanks to my mom because she's like our biggest fan.
And also, I think Jeff at work listens to it, so thank you, Jeff.
Adam.
Oh, Adam listens.
Over in KZ.
Adam listens to it. Thanks, Adam.
Yeah. Bill. We're just going to do some shout-outs here for a second. Bill Mathis of... What is this podcast? Here's the Deal. Okay, that's not me saying here's the deal. That's the name of his podcast. He and his friend Quentin do a podcast every week called Here's the Deal. If I could, I would link it somehow, but there's no way for me to do that because we only do this through iTunes.
Correct.
But if you get the chance, if you're listening to this podcast and you've gotten to this point of the podcast, I highly advocate that you, when this one finishes here in about the next 15 seconds, I highly advocate that you just hop on over to that search and just click it all the way in there and find Here's the Deal with Bill and Q and just take a listen. Good friends of mine, and we may do a crossover episode at some point, so you never know.
And also, just everybody have a good night, okay? Everybody have a good day and a good night.
And a good week and a good month.
A good weekend.
A good year. Have a good life. Live your best life now.
Amen.
Hold on a second. That's Joel Osteen.
No, thank you.
No, thanks.
This is my Bible. I believe what it tells me. I'm Joel Osteen.